So Tim, thank you so much for participating in our community of practice channel here on YouTube. So on behalf of SETSI, we thank you so much for taking the time today.
Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. All right. So, as always, we begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, if you can please do us the honors by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your amazing work.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Tim Jackson, and for the last 8 years, I've had the privilege of leading an organization called Shad Canada. Shad is a program for high school students that have just finished grade 10 or 11. They go away from home and spend a month at one of 24 university partners we have across the country. So they spend a month with their peers from coast to coast to coast. They get lectures, workshops in a university or post-secondary setting, and then they work in a team to solve a problem. And those problems are rooted in social challenges. So how might we help Canadians treat fresh water with more respect, or it might be around helping deal with food insecurity or green energy. And over the course of the month, they design a solution to that problem using scientific or engineering principles. And so I have the privilege of being a steward of the organization. It's been around for more than 43 years, so I'm at it at one point in its journey. And so we do that both in person, and as a result of COVID, we did an online offering for 2 years, which we now have made a permanent fixture. So most of our participants come in person, but some can do it online if they want to. So we offer a virtual offering. And so for me, it's been the culmination of a journey that started in the business world. I'm an accountant by profession and spent time in the corporate world, moved into the technology sector as a CFO and a CEO, was in the venture capital space, and then got very involved in the nonprofit world, particularly around the impact investing space and the social world. And I got very involved in a lot of charitable activities. So for me, this is the culmination of taking my career that started in business, moved to quasi business / social and things like incubators, accelerators, and now I'm working for a full-time charity trying to help impact young people who will go on and change the world. And that's the view we take at Shad, is that we are trying to unleash potential. And we know that if we can do that with young people from all walks of life, have them see what's possible, they will go on to change the world.
Absolutely. That's always a soft spot for me is the youth, because they are the next generation. So we have to steer them and mold them in the right way so that they can take off running. So that's awesome. And could you articulate your personal mission and vision and like what inspires you about the work you do?
So for me, it's as mentioned, it's this culmination. I had a part of my journey where I spent 10 years as a venture capitalist. And when you are running a venture capital firm, you are your own boss in many ways. And what I mean by that is you have the ability to run your own calendar and your time. You have a much better ability to manage it. And so during that decade, I got very involved in the community. I'd been previously a volunteer, but at that point in time, it allowed me to do things like chair the food bank of Waterloo Region, chair a library board where we built a new library. And so as you get more and more involved in that world, I started thinking about how can I do this for a living in many ways. So how can this be, so I transition strictly from a business standpoint. And so I was very lucky that I transitioned into things like Accelerator Incubator, moved to the University of Waterloo for 3 years, and then went to Mars in Toronto, one of the world's largest urban innovation hubs, and went there initially to lead the Centre for Impact Investing. I had been very fortunate to be asked to sit on Canada's task force for impact investing or social finance. And so for me, it's the way I approach Shad is there's a business lens through which we run the operation, in the sense that we have to make the economics work. We have to run it like a business, but we're having an impact that goes way beyond bottom line. And so for me, it's how do you take what I've been fortunate to learn over my career and journey, and then say, how can I pass that on? And so, very much when I think about what my mission is now, my personal mission, I think it's really twofold. One is to have an impact through the work that I and the team here at Shad lead, which is empowering and inspiring young people, but it's also the still staying involved in the community. So I'm fortunate that I have a great board of directors who encourage me to continue to give back. So I chair the investment committee and sit on the board of the Waterloo Region Community Foundation, for example, where we're moving to 100% mission aligned investing. So I get to mix both of these worlds together. And so for me, I feel very fortunate I had some great mentors along the way. I feel like I've been very lucky in terms of my journey. And I don't say it to sound hokey or cliche, but I think we have an obligation to give back. I preached that when I was in the technology sector about the obligation of our sector to give back to more than I think it has traditionally done. And I still think that's a weakness within the tech sector for a whole bunch of reasons. I just think if you live in a community, and I define community broadly, you have a responsibility to give back to it. So I'm fortunate that I get to do it now in my job as well as in my personal life.
Wow, that's awesome. Amazing. So on the flip side, what challenges or barriers have you faced in your work, and how were you able to overcome them?
Yeah, I think there's I spent a lot of my career in and around the technology sector. So perhaps I'll focus on that for a little bit. And I think that one of the things that we struggle with as a society is having people understand their role. So what do I mean by that? So I live in a community Waterloo region. And when I was a student here back at university, it was textiles, automotive parts, manufacturing. And the social infrastructure that was needed in this community was in large part supported by these large manufacturers, large employers, pardon me, who had been here for many years. And you had a culture that they were plants, manufacturing plants and others. And there was a culture that everyone in those organizations saw the involvement of the higher hires up in the company being involved. So the CEO might lead the United Way campaign one year, and if you were a junior person in the company, you would see your boss was at the Rotary Club or was out fundraising for a campaign. And so I think there was a culture that you understood that there was a responsibility to give back. Our economy here transitioned to the tech sector, and we were very lucky. We had some very large technology companies who became very philanthropic, but the economy's changed, and so now you have a bunch of early stage technology companies or early stage or growing technology companies. And so if you think about it, you graduate at 19 or 20 years old, you go to work at a tech company, your boss might be 25 years old, and doesn't understand that there's a responsibility, I think, for them to be involved in the community. So as our economy has transitioned, people are bouncing around from jobs 2 or 3 years at a time instead of staying somewhere. And so I think back to myself as an accountant. The traditional accounting path was you went to an accounting firm and you would see the firm involved in things in the community and saying, we have a responsibility, whether it's arts and culture, whether it was social services, whatever it might be. I think that's missing a little bit today. And it's not the fault of the 25-year-old CEO who probably doesn't understand. And when we'll talk to some of these folks, it will be, yes, I will give and I will get involved, but it's at a later stage. I'll do it later in my career. I had a conversation with a friend who at the time was the CEO of a large company. And I asked him how many of his employees made more than $100,000 at the time. And he said he figured it was over 100. And I said, how many of those do you think are giving more than $100 to charity each year? And he said, I can probably count it on one hand. And I said, there's something wrong with that. And it's not just money, but it's also time. But I think it speaks to this changing demographic, changing culture. So that's a very long-winded answer to say, I think what I view as the most frustrating one of all the things I see is not specific to Shad or not specific to a specific organization. It's this broader culture. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a ton of people doing great work. But I think there's something different about, and I think it is driven by workplace and how workplaces operate today. And just my sense is, if a place like Waterloo Region 30 years ago when I was in school, the folks just said we need to take care of each other. And there are some great philanthropic activities underway in Waterloo Region, but I think the gap is widening. And it's widening, I think, right across the country and the world. And there's something that we need to change at the top end. Those who have the capacity to help, I just think need to do more so we can bring, narrow that gap. So I apologize. That might not be where you wanted me to go with that, but
Oh,
you gave
no,
me a
that's
soapbox, so I
perfect.
took it.
No, that's perfect. Thank you for that because, it's the workplace also that can kind of spark that drive within their workers to do that, to donate and time, either time or money,
Right.
you know what I mean? I do remember working in some past offices where they have, especially around Christmas time, around holidays, you
Yes.
know, give, buy a toy for a family. So there was that. I used to work for RBC. That's what we did. We put, little toys or
Yeah.
something. We would pick a family, yeah, or five families, let's say, and then we would gift their children toys. So that's something. But as things progress and as things are actually getting more what's the word, more heavy, like, let me just keep it layman, like, on society and on the generations with housing and food security and those things like that, it needs to get a little bit more fine-tuned as to see what does the community need, especially as you said, people making, you know five figures and up,
Yeah.
so for sure.
I think that's right. And I think I remember when I was doing some work on the arts and culture, for example, I would spend a lot of time going out to, in this case, the technology companies and asking them what was their biggest priority. And they would say recruitment and retention of talent. And I would say, what, expand on that a little bit more. And they would say, we need to attract people to the region. We need to make sure there's things for people to do when they're here. They're bringing their families. And I would go back a month later and be fundraising for one of the arts organizations, and they would say, "Oh, that's got nothing to do with us. That's that's." And I think, oh, there's this disconnect between you're making your community livable and workable, and unfortunately, I in Waterloo Region, we are multiple municipalities, so it gets even worse because we have the municipalities will play off each other in terms of, I don't want a safe consumption site in my community. It can go to one of the other cities, or I don't want to deal with the unhoused because I ideally would like them to go across the border. So I just think there's a general I just have a general frustration with both the approach that we are taking as society and people just stepping up and saying, we all have a responsibility in different ways to deal with these issues. And perhaps it's because I was exposed to so much of it when I was doing the work around social finance and impact investing, thinking there are solutions to some of these challenges. We need to think differently. But I think a lot of it just comes back to we work and we live differently than we used to, and we need to therefore adopt the way we educate people about responsibility and philanthropic giving, both time and treasure, I think.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So tell me, what are some of your key priorities you're working on currently?
Yeah. So if I take Shad specifically, when I was approached about the role, I didn't know a lot about Shad. I knew a little bit about it. But the organization had an incredible track record. And I originally said no to the recruiter. And then she pushed me a little bit. And I said, give me 2 weeks. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, every room I was in, I would mention Shad. It could be my poker game. It could be a social setting. And inevitably, someone would say to me, oh, I went to Shad, changed my life. Or my daughter went to Shad. It was transformational. So I went back to the recruiter and I said, the language people are using about the impact of the program is significant. I had read it in marketing materials, but I thought it was a little bit of marketing promotion. And so I said, there's something here. And so my pitch to the board when I was being interviewed and recruited, I said, I don't know if I'm the right person or not. But my observation is Shad has had a meaningful impact on the participants who've gone through the program. But it looks to me like you're getting the same students from the same schools and the same communities year after year. So if I'm to come into the role, I think what we need to do is go out and find Canadian youth wherever they are across the country. And so we've been on a mission to say, the makeup of our participants should look like the Canadian youth population. And so to do that, you have to start measuring who's coming into the program, and then you have to measure data against Canadian youth. So when I started, we identified early on that we were underrepresented by students from rural and remote communities, students from lower income backgrounds, and Indigenous youth. And so we put processes in place to deal with that. And over time, we've got more and more refined as to what we do. So we are trying to make sure we are getting youth from everywhere in the country. And in fact, our position is we have a responsibility to find youth wherever they are. And that has meant working with a lot of partners. So for us to go into certain communities, people don't know who Shad is, or certainly didn't. And so we're working with partners in those communities. And it's been a multi-year journey to have those partners comfortable with our program. And then for them to be able to say to people in their communities, you know what, you're okay sending your daughter away halfway across the country for a month, because that's a huge undertaking for someone who isn't familiar with us. So that's been a big priority, is not just filling our program with youth, just anyone who wants to get in. It's finding them so that we can say we've got the right number from geographic representation, from economic representation, from demographic representation. And so for us, we started thinking about, what's the right size for Shad? When I started, it was relatively small, 600 or so spaces a year, 10 university campuses. But we have a huge wait list. Last year, we had 600 participants that we thought should be in the program we did not have space for. So our board has said, let's figure out what the right size is. There are 850,000 grade 10 and 11 students across the country, and they attend 3,350 high schools. So we have set our short-term goal, which is 2030. So whether you think that's short-term or mid-term, we would like to have 3,350 spaces at Shad, which means there's one space for every high school, because we think there has to be a Shad in every school. It doesn't matter whether it's in Nunavut, doesn't matter whether it's in rural Alberta, whether it's a school for students who are interested in the arts, whether it's a vocational school. And so we are now growing the program to ideally be at 3,350 spaces by 2030. So we have to find students, we have to have space for, and we have to make it affordable. And so a large part of my role is out fundraising to make sure that we just don't fill it with students that can afford to pay to attend the program. Because it goes back to my earlier comment to draw the circle. Those 3,350 youth have to be representative of Canada's youth population. And so that's the commitment that my board and team have made. And so what's my priority? It's to do that. And to do it in a way that is equitable to all Canadian youth, which means that some youth pay nothing to attend our program, and some youth pay a full fee to attend the program. So that's the current priorities that I'm working on.
Wow, that's amazing. It kind of reminds me back when I was in school. I went to school in Burlington, and we had junior achievement. Do you remember?
Absolutely, and we partner with Junior Achievement. Junior Achievement still exists. It's a great program, and and they're in school. So to some extent, we are Junior Achievement plus a few other things on steroids, where you can do it for the entire month.
Wow, that's awesome. It was amazing. It was amazing. I really enjoyed that. That's awesome. It's good to know they're still around.
Oh yeah, they're thriving. They're right across the country. Junior Achievement's a great partner of ours.
Awesome. So tell me, how do you feel about the future of social impact in Canada?
Yeah. So I'm optimistic about it, and I'm probably have always been overly optimistic. It was a large part of my life for a while when I was on the Canadian Task Force for Impact Investing, and then I was very fortunate. Because I was Canada's representative at what the time was the G7 task force on impact investing. Well, that was the group that was chaired by Sir Ronald Cohen. So we would get together 3 or 4 times a year as an international group. We then took all of the country task force reports, did a broad report nationally, and became the global steering group. And so the way it was always described at the time, Sir Ronald used to say, Canada's leading the second wave. So you had the UK and the US that were leading the way, and then we had the advantage of watching and learning from what they did well and what they didn't do well. And then I feel like there was a bit of a lull. where we had made some progress and as a country, and then there was a bit of a dip. But my sense is things are coming back, and I think even the early work is having the seeds have been planted. So I look at things like that task force report that was 2010 said we would like to see foundations lead the way. If you can get foundations to lead the way on social finance and impact investing, they can prove the model, and then pension funds and others will follow. So I'm very fortunate that here in Waterloo Region, we have a foundation, the Waterloo Region Community Foundation, where we committed to impact investing. And we've made multiple direct impact investments, which have generated a good return for us, and have allowed us to take our biggest asset at any foundation is obviously your endowment. So we have $120-ish million, and we said, okay, we've seen through these impact investments, we can actually make a difference and both generate a financial return while also generating a social return. So we have made a commitment at the Waterloo Community Foundation to move 100% of our endowed funds into mission-aligned investing. And so we've been on a journey over the past 2 or 3 years to do that. Have just hired a new outsourced chief investment officer that's helping us transition everything. So saying, our goal as a foundation is to do good. Let's do good with the entire 120 million we have. So that's one example, but that's why I'm optimistic, because it's not just us that are doing it. There was a meeting a couple of weeks ago where you had foundations, Toronto Foundation and Hamilton Foundation and the Oakville Community Foundation, London. All these foundations are doing work in this area, and that's just within southwestern Ontario. So you multiply that across the country, and good things are happening. And I think, like everything, it will take longer. But I'd like to think that 50 years from now, we're not even talking about it as social finance. It's just finance, and it's what's happening.
Exactly. I'm very hopeful too. So, as I always say, we're just dropping seeds. It's really the next generation where we will be passing the baton on. So it's really about putting in the work now so that the benefits can be reaped by the next generation, and they can keep going for the next generation. So yeah. Awesome.
As I always say after the summer ends for Shad, I always send a note to our board of directors summarizing the summer, and I typically conclude it with something along the lines of, our country and world are going to be just fine if we don't screw it up, because these young people, they've got it. They've got it.
Absolutely, I agree. So tell me, just summarize, what is your ultimate goal, and what does success look like to you?
Yeah, so I think big picture, to me, is this notion that we're not talking about impact investing or social finance. It's just embedded, so that everyone who is or making investments are thinking about, how do I do good with my funds? And I go back to some of our earlier comments. So when you think about the large challenges we face as society, whether it's the unhoused, whether it's food insecurity, social issues, governments have tried for decades to solve these issues and have been unsuccessful. And so if we can redirect some of the capital that is tied up in pension funds and endowments and the like, I think there's an opportunity to rethink the way we do this. There's a quote from the former, she was with Rockefeller Foundation, and I think her quote was, the issue is not that there's not enough money to solve these issues. The issue is the money's all tied up in public markets. And so I think, whether we like it or not, money talks. And so if we can start to have people who are responsible for investing funds being very deliberate about saying these things are important, then I think that will change, change some of the impacts. At the end of the day, we know that you can still look at to double or triple bottom line, and still generate market returns while still doing good. So I think big picture, it's that we have innovative new solutions to solving some of these challenges that we have faced for decades. And it's everybody's playing the role. There will always be a role for government. I truly believe that. There's also a role for private sector. And it doesn't mean that we need to change a lot of things we're doing. It's thinking about it differently. And then there's a role for any of us who have an ability to, that are playing in the investment space, to be saying to our investment managers, I want my funds to go to people who are not just trying to generate bottom line, they're trying to generate double and triple bottom lines.
Exactly. Wow, this has been so inspirational, so empowering. Really appreciate the time. So, my last question is, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action at this time?
Simply that I think people should just be trying to do what they can do where they are and what's comfortable for them. And so that's very different for someone who is perhaps in your or my position than a 15-year-old. But I think it's just constantly thinking about how can I make life better for others around me. And as I'm sure all your listeners do, it's this idea that if you do good to others, then they will pass that on. And I've been very fortunate that a lot of people were very, very kind to me over my journey. And so I take the same approach to try to do the same and help folks. I think if we just all do that to each other, I know that sounds like I'm sort of saying let's all sing Kumbaya, but I truly think in a world where there is so much hate and there is it's so divided, I think if we're just compassionate towards each other, things will be a lot better for everybody.
Absolutely. It just takes one little pebble in the river or the ocean, as they say, to really cause that ripple effect and keep it going, you know. So it may seem a little to us, but it can be very huge for somebody else, and then they'll pass it on and pass it on. So that's awesome. Well, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time. We appreciate your leadership. We wish you much success in your ventures, and we will definitely be collaborating in the near future. And yeah, we would love to, like I think Victor was talking about the Solidarity Working Group and coming on. That's a great way to collaborate with other leaders like yourself. So on behalf of SETI, we thank you once again for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. So we will close the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So we'll be in touch, Tim, and thank you once again for everything.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye bye.
All right, take care. Bye bye.